Okay, I'd like to just extend a warm welcome to you all this evening to SFU's Harbour Centre campus. You're here, I presume, for the talk, The Burden of Housing Refugees, a Perspective from Rohingya Hosting Chittagong. Before we begin the proceedings, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we are gathered this evening is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I would also like at this point just to extend thanks to the people in the various units at SFU who we all pooled our resources together to make this happen tonight. So I'd like to thank Michael Hathaway, the director of the David Lamb Center, and the steering committee for committing to helping fund this event. I'd also like to mention, is Doris still here? Maybe she's gone. But Doris tied a tremendous amount of work to bring this together this evening. So Doris, wherever you are, thank you. I hope she hears that. Also, Tamir Mustafa, who directs our School for International Studies, is here this evening. I'd like to thank him for his contribution through IS to our event. And Dr. Amal Ghazal from our Center for Comparative Muslim Studies. Thank you for supporting this event. And I'd like to thank myself, Paul Crow, who chairs the Department of Humanities. We also sponsored this event this evening. And in fact, it was pure luck. I was at the International Association of Buddhist Studies meeting at the University of Toronto in 2017 and spotted Dr. Barua from across the room, and we got together and started talking about what he had planned. And I said, you know, you really should come out to SFU and share your work with us. So I'm really thankful he could be here. Dr. Mitra Barua is the Annette and Hugh Gregg Postdoc Fellow in Transnational Asian Studies at Rice University's Chow Center for Asian Studies in Texas. He examines the contested history of the North Bay Bengal region, crisscrossed by three national boundaries, India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. With a focus on a Buddhist-Muslim relationship in the Chittagong Rakhine area, he investigates how a linguistically diverse, culturally tolerant, and religious syncretic society has been plagued by ethnic and religious bigotry, intolerance, and violence. I would like to plug his forthcoming monograph as well, which is of great interest to me. I work in this area as well. His forthcoming monograph, Seeding Buddhism with Multiculturalism, from McGill, Queens, U Press, which discusses the intercultural and intergenerational transmission of Buddhist beliefs and practices among Sri Lankan immigrants in Toronto. So I'm very interested in interculturalism and Asian religious traditions in Canada. Anyway, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you, Misha, to Vancouver, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul, and his colleagues, as well as those who made this trip, it happened. So I'm so happy to be here and share the work that I've been working on in terms of understanding that region, what we call the border region of Bangladesh, India, and Myanmar. So just self-introductions with a kind of disclaimer, I guess. I'm neither a Rohingya activist nor a Rakhine or Myanmar government defender. Instead, I am a scholar of religion in South Asia, particularly in extended Bengal. So I will kind of clarify that term, extended Bengal, please. I am interested in religious minority-majority relations in colonial and post-colonial times and the state's role in those relations. So that's the kind of area that you can see there. Burma and of course India and Bangladesh in between. So when I say extended Bengal in colonial time, one could arguably include present-day Myanmar's Rakhine state into it. However, when we go further into the past, let's say pre-colonial Bengal, one could claim that the contemporary Chittagong region in Bangladesh was an Rakhine territory. So you see Chittagong and Rakhine state of what I would refer here Arakan, because sometimes it's quite confusing. Because the majority of people who are living in Rakhine state, they are also called Rakhine. So for that purpose, I'm going to use Rakhine to refer those ethnic people, but the location I'm going to refer as Arakan. So when we jump fast forward into the post-colonial period, that is after mid-20th century, the Bengal-Arakan region is crisscrossed by three states, namely India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. If you allow me to further narrow my geographical focus, I would say I am studying religious majority-minority relations in Chittagong-Arakan region. Chittagong-Arakan area used to be a unified region known for religious harmony derived from historical presence of ethnic, linguistic, and religious diversities. However, it has now become an epicenter of the Muslim Buddhist violence due to, I should say, twisted religio-nationalism at both sides of the border. That means Buddhist nationalism in Myanmar and Bengali Muslim nationalism in Bangladesh have endangered the lives of religious minorities. Rohingya crisis exemplifies the danger of conflation of religious identity with territorial boundaries of nation states. Just to give you a kind of the contemporary situation there, it just came out a report, I think 3 days ago. So it says that after August 25th, 2017, 725,000 Rohingyas arrived across the border and arrived in Chittagong, Bangladesh. And then, of course, majority of them were children. And now 1.3 million people at that region, the border region, need assistance, and many of them are children, of course. Another thing is going to happen, sometimes in a few weeks or so perhaps, Bangladesh government is going to relocate 100,000 Rohingya people a place called Floating Island. Sometime next month, that's the plan. So the floating island is called Bashanchar. It is in the middle of the Bay of Bengal to some extent, you see. So it's quite frightening to think about the things going to happen sometime in a few weeks or so. So for comprehensive understanding of the Rohingya crisis in Arakan, I would argue that we need a cross-border historical analysis. That's what I intend to provide in this talk. First, I will briefly talk about the immediate effect of Rohingya crisis on the Chittagong side of the border. Second, I will lay out the shared religious history of the region across the border. Lastly, I want to brainstorm with all of you what could be the solution for the crisis. Perhaps Chittagong could provide an example in that direction. So, just be with me. My moderate hope is at this end of this talk, I would be able to provide you with Chittagong's perspective on the Rohingya crisis. As a preamble to that perspective, let me start with a cross-border analysis and a Canadian report on the Rohingya crisis. Perhaps some of you are familiar with the report that came out, I think, in April. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's response to the Myanmar military's atrocities against the Rohingya in August 2017. In addition to condemnation of the violence, he appointed the seasoned politician Mr. Bob Rae as Canada's special envoy to Myanmar. After a 6-month-long investigation, Rae released his report in April 2018 entitled "Tell Them We Are Human." I like that title. Among other things, Rae's report provided an urgently needed trans-border perspective on the Rohingya crisis. Rae rightly applauds Bangladeshi state and the local residents of Cox's Bazar in Chittagong who have sympathetically taken the Herculean task of sheltering more than 1 million Rohingya refugees. With sheltering the Rohingyas, the Bangladeshi state and people have a set of burdens on their shoulders. Rae referred to some of them, namely worsening of local economy, increasing security concerns, and disrupting the local way of life. He also mentioned that there is a huge hatred between Rohingya as well as the Rakhine people in Myanmar or in Rakhine state. And he says that poses that poses a lot of danger in terms of safety of the people, particularly the Rohingya people who are living there, as well as returning of the people who are already left out that region but trying to get into the country, or the governments are working to get people in. So Ray's report, however, fell short, I should say, with no reference to the crisis impact on Buddhist-Muslim coexistence in Bangladesh. Bangladesh, particularly Chittagong's plain, exemplify one of the longest living testimony of Buddhist-Muslim peaceful coexistence, I should say peaceful coexistence there, where Buddhism is a minority religion. The Rohingya crisis has threatened that peaceful Buddhist-Muslim coexistence. Let me give an example. At the end of September 2012, Bangla-speaking Buddhists in the Chittagong Plains witnessed the worst atrocity against them. Muslims with anti-Muslim slogans looted Buddhist villages, set fire on many ancient Buddhist temples, and threatened Buddhist monks, men, women, and children. Thousands of Buddhists became homeless overnight, and more than 20 ancient Buddhist temples were attacked, vandalized, and some of them burned down to ashes. The whole Bangladeshi Buddhist community across the Chittagong region and beyond were spellbound, shaken, and scared. The pretext for that violence was an image of the Islamic holy book, Quran, on fire, tagged onto a Facebook account with a Buddhist name. The investigations on the issue revealed that the pretext was fabricated for the whole purpose of instigating violence against the Buddhist community. The timing of the attack suggests that the 2012 anti-Muslim violence in Rakhine state triggered the anti-Buddhist violence in Chittagong. I am not suggesting that Rohingya refugees are involved in the anti-Buddhist violence in Chittagong. Rather, anti-Buddhist opportunists in Bangladesh have abused the Rohingya presence in Chittagong to instigate inter-religious violence against Buddhists. It reminds the axiom, violence breeds violence. The Bangladeshi state swiftly responded by protecting and compensating the victimized Buddhist minority. Since the incident, Buddhists in Bangladesh have been subjected to increased verbal and physical violence. Bangladeshi state security personnel are present for 24/7 at main Buddhist temple across Bangladesh to deter any Buddhist violence. What a contrast with the Myanmar government's role in the Rohingya crisis. Violence against religious minorities in the region has been a recurring theme since from the nation-state formation in the 1940s. In 1947, colonial India became two nation-states. In the heart of that state formation was Muslim, non-Muslim divide. Pakistan with east and west wings was born as a nation-state for Muslim minority compared to Hindu majority. East Pakistan separated from West Pakistan became known as Bangladesh in 1971. In East Pakistan and then in Bangladesh, Hindus have repeatedly suffered from anti-Hindu violence. Similarly, Muslim minority in India has suffered at the hands of Hindu extremists. Buddhists in Bangladesh, particularly in Chittagong's hills, have suffered at the hands of Bangladeshi security forces and Bengali Muslim majority. As many of you know, the Rohingya Muslim minority in Myanmar have repeatedly suffered from the hands of state security forces on and off since the Burmese independence 1948. Recently, the violence against Rohingya has taken an inter-religious character. It has been characterized as Buddhist majority's hatred and violence against the Muslim minority. This is relatively a recent characterization of a decade-long crisis with political, racial, or ethnic, economic, and religious dimensions. In other words, Rohingya crisis is a multi-dimensional crisis. Religion is just a small part of equation. Historically, the issue has been primarily a political crisis, but recently it has been perceived as a primarily an inter-religious violence. I argue that this transmutations of identity of the crisis, that is primarily a political crisis, becoming a primarily interreligious violence, is the biggest burden for refugee housing in Bangladesh. I make that argument on the basis of 2012 anti-Buddhist violence in Chittagong region. It is known as Ramu violence, named after its epicenter, Ramu in Cox's Bazar in Chittagong. Ramu is located just a few miles away from the world's largest refugee camp, the Kutupalong Rohingya refugee camp. I hope you don't get me wrong. I am not comparing the 2012 anti-Buddhist Ramu violence with the unspeakable atrocities against Rohingya Muslims in Rakhine. Although two events are related, they are certainly not comparable. As you are well aware of the fact that anti-Rohingya violence have killed many thousands Rohingya Muslims and have made more than 1 million Rohingyas refugees in Bangladesh and elsewhere, including Canada. The whole purpose of my reference to the anti-Buddhist Ramu violence in Chittagong is to highlight the burden of housing Rohingya refugees in the Chittagong region. To unpack the argument, let me briefly refer to the little-known history of Buddhists in Chittagong. Currently, 1 million Buddhists live, around 1 million Buddhists live in Bangladesh's Chittagong. They belong to mainly four ethno-religious identities. They are the Chakmas and Marma Buddhists in Chittagong hill tracts, Bengali Buddhists in Chittagong plains. The Rakhine Buddhists have presence in the coastal areas of Chittagong. Only 1/3 of Chittagong Buddhists speak Bangla, the national language of Bangladesh. Consequently, they have been self-identified with the Bangla language-based Bengali identity. Bangla language-based Bengali identity. Of course, it eventually became an ethnic identity, but of course, it's historically it derived from the language. Others' mother tongues variously resemble the Rakhine rendition of the Burmese language. They ethnically identify themselves as non-Bengali, such as Chakma, Marma, and Rakhine. The oral tradition-based ancestry history of Chakma and Bengali Buddhists suggests that their ancestral home was in Chittagong and wider Bengal. Marma and Rakhine Buddhist ancestors, however, this is very important, historically derived from Arakan itself. For example, when the Mughal Muslim forces conquered Arakanese Chittagong in 1666, some Arakanese remained in the hills in southern Chittagong. Some scholars argue that the current Marma Buddhists in southern Chittagong derive or descend from the Arakanese in pre-Mughal Chittagong. Rakhine Buddhist history in Chittagong started further later in the late 18th century. In 1784 and 85, Burmese King Bodofai annexed independently ruled Arakanese kingdom. Because of this Burmese invasion, many Arakanese took shelter, or Rakhine people took shelter in the colonial Chittagong region, particularly in the coastal area of Cox's Bazar and Kotuakali. They assisted the British colonial administration in the first Anglo-Burma war that annexed Arakan. Although many Rakhine refugees returned to Arakan after 1826, some in fact remain in colonial Chittagong. The current Rakhine Buddhists in Cox's Bazar and Kotuakali descend from the Rakhine refugees that remain. Despite of ethnic linguistic differences among Chittagong Buddhists, they all have practiced the same reform Theravada Buddhism introduced from Arakan in the mid-19th century. In other words, since the mid-19th century, Arakanese Buddhism gradually replaced the pre-existing Buddhism that was called the Rauli tradition. That means the current Buddhist tradition in Chittagong is the same Theravada Buddhism found in Arakan. The shared Theravada Buddhism across the Chittagong-Arakan border refers to the religio-cultural movement from east, that means from Arakan to west, that is Chittagong. Similarly, the Rohingyas and their religion, that is Islam, in Arakan indicate the cultural movement across the current Chittagong-Arakan border from other direction, that is from west, from Chittagong to east Arakan. As Chittagong's Buddhist history is inseparable from Arakan, the history of Islam in Arakan is inseparable from Chittagong. One may find historical traces of Islam as early as, in Arakan in the 11th century. But it was only in the late 16th and early 17th century Islam became prominent in Arakan court. Recent scholarship on Islam in Arakan suggests that Islam rose to prominence in the late medieval Arakan court due to Arakanese rulers' calculated political tactics. This is how it happened. In the 16th century, the lucrative Chittagong port made three regional powers political rivals. Hindu Tripura kingdom in the north, and the Muslim Sultanate and Mughal power in the west, and the Buddhist Arakanese kingdom in the southeast. So I'm just locating these places, of course, in relation to Chittagong harbor or Chittagong port. In the late 16th century, the Arakanese power became prominent and took control over the Chittagong region. Arakanese rule in Chittagong lasted nearly 8 decades that ended with the 1666 Mughal conquest of the Chittagong port and surrounding area. The Arakanese court during the better part of the 17th century took a multicultural, multilingual and multi-religious character. Arakanese king adopted Persian Muslim titles side by side Arakanese Buddhist title. They produced trilingual coins written in Arakanese, Arabic and Bengali characters. You see in this picture. And this one, of course, is written in Arakanese characters, and the other one is on top, is this Arabic characters, and below it is the Bengali characters there. Bengali Hindus and Muslims from Chittagong like Ashok Khan and Magana Thakur enjoyed influential ministerial positions in the Arakan court. Bengali Muslim poets from Chittagong, Daulat Qazi and Sayyid Alaul became Arakanese court poets, and they composed Bengali poetries and eulogies praising the court. Historians of the region argue that these multicultural characters of the late medieval Arakanese court were motivated to neutralize rival claims of the Muslim and Hindu rulers over the Chittagong port and the region. The late medieval court culture also sheds light on the current politically charged and hotly debated ethnic reference, Rohingya. Perhaps you could remember when the former US President Obama used Rohingya in his speech at the University of Yangon in 2012. The Myanmar government and the people became furious and they demanded to withdraw it. Similarly, Pope Francis, during his last year visit to Myanmar and Bangladesh, talked in favor of Rohingya cause, but he did not utter the term Rohingya. Similarly, the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan's report on the Rohingya crisis did not use the word Rohingya. Instead, he identified them as, quote, Muslims in Arakan. This hotly debated term derives from the late medieval Bengali words written in and out of Arakan, where Arakan is repeatedly referred to as Rosan. Rosan eventually became Rohang, because in some of these Indo-European languages, of course, Sir become her become Sir. So in that case, Rosan became Rohang, and then of course Rohingya. Historians of Arakan have consistently noticed that all the term has a medieval origin. It arose to the prominence since the 1940s and 50s by absorbing other widely used identities like Chittagongians and Bengalis in colonial period. This is very important because this history is not appreciated by the people who really pushing forward this identity, Rohingya. Colonial rule in Arakan lasted nearly 125 years, from 1824 to 1948. Among all the regions in Myanmar or Burma, Arakan was severely affected by what colonial historians call the double colonization. The term double colonization refers to the British colonial governance of Burma mainly through English-educated Indians. By the time the British annexed Arakan in 1826, the British had been as colonial rulers in Indian coastal cities like Calcutta, Chittagong and Madras nearly for 7 decades, since 1757. Many of these Indian cities provided the colonial workforces needed to maintain the colonial order in Burma. The British brought many English-educated Indians to Arakan and subsequently other parts of colonial Burma to run the colonial administration, trade and economy. Indians were in places in every sector of colonial Burmese society. They set up their own Indian settlements, mostly in urban but also some rural locations. Indian language speakers, dockers, laborers, clerks, traders and bankers ran economic engine of colonial Burma. Indians in large numbers were deployed to keep the law and order and to maintain security. By 1942, there were 1.1 million Indians in colonial Burma, that is 6 to 7% of total 16 million large population. They had disproportionate influence and control over the colony. In the totem pole of social stratification in colonial Burma, the British were on the top. Below them it was mostly Indians, but in some cases Chinese as well. The Burmese were on the bottom of the political, economic and social hierarchies. In this hierarchical and segregated colonial society, the majority Burmese remain poor and powerless. So within the context we see that the Burmese people really developed a sense of resentment, frustrations and resistance, and they directed them toward Indians. The decades-long Burmese resentment turned into Indophobic feelings, and they were expressed violently against Indians in 1920s and 30s. Anti-Indian pogroms started in cities like Rangoon. But it also got momentum with the rural-based Saya Sen rebellion in 1930 and 31. They got intensified with the early 1930s global Great Depression that hit harder the rice produced in rural Burmese. These economic and Burmese nationalist agitation led to politically separate colonial Burma from India. The Burmese Legislative Council was formed in 1937 and it passed anti-Indian bills and banned immigration from India and limited non-Burmese ownership of lands and properties. With the break of the Second World War, the Burmese nationalists sided with the Japanese forces, resulting in the Japanese invasion of colonial Burma in 1942. Historians of colonial Burma name the post-1937 political, administrative and legal changes as part of the de-Indianization process. These measures drastically reduced Indians in Burma from 1.1 million to 700,000 or so by the time Burma became an independent state, independent nation in 1948. Post-colonial Burma confronted with two issues. First, how to disown the huge non-Burmese population inherited from the colonial era. Second, how to own and bring together many ethnic groups who had been hitherto neglected in colonial Burma. Post-colonial policymakers adopted a simple strategy, that is, they defined Indians and others as non-national or foreigners. On the other hand, various indigenous groups as national races. These national versus non-national categories excluded the Indians, while national races were included in emerging Burmese nation. Both of them were two sides of the same nation-building project. To disown the colonial foreigners, Burmese nationalists intensified the Indianization or the de-Indianization process through new legal, economic, and social policies. For example, 1962, Navy military government adopted socialist nationalization process that confiscated the foreign-owned properties, businesses, and other assets. Many Indian origin individuals were deprived of basic rights and they had enjoyed before. These severe measures in the name of nation building effectively purged non-Burmese population. Consequently, another few 100,000 Indians left Burma. Not all Indians were capable of leaving Burma. Some indeed remained in post-colonial Burma. They did so simply because they either lacked meaningful connection to their ancestral homeland, that was India, or they lacked financial means to rebuild lives in India or elsewhere. They had no better option than remain in Burma and get Burmanized. Not all, but many remaining Indians took Burmese names, adopted Burmese dress and customs as a way to Burmanize themselves. Burmanization was, in fact, a part and parcel of de-Indianization, process that exemplified the post-colonial political strategy of reversing colonial policies. The politics in post-colonial Burma is also known for reviving pre-colonial mechanisms to build nation-states. The UNO government, that is the first post-colonial government of independent Burma, employed Buddhism as a political strategy to integrate diverse national races to form a united Burmese nation. UNO introduced Buddhism as a state religion. Buddhism as a political strategy indeed derived from pre-colonial Burmese history. UNO might have thought that Buddhism as a religion of nearly 90% of Burmese population could have been a strategic tool to pull together various ethnic groups. But that move stirred up the non-Buddhist minorities, particularly those living in Burmese peripheries along Burma's land borders. Consequently, ethno-religious minorities went to war with the central Burmese government. These internal conflicts got further complicated when the Navy military government took power in 1962. The Burmese army was an almost exclusively a Burman institution. When I say Burman means the majority ethnic group. Burmese refers to all people who kind of there but belong to different ethnic groups. Burman are the majority ethnic. The military rule imposed Burman ethnic dominance over non-Burman ethnic groups, be they Buddhist or non-Buddhist. That further exacerbated the national integration project, and it further increased the armed conflicts with the central military authority. This failed post-colonial nation-building project, misguided by majority religion and dominant ethnicity, becomes crucial in understanding the Rohingya crisis. Before we discuss how the failed Burmese nation-building project played out in Arakan, let me briefly survey the Indian population in colonial Arakan. The British census collected between 1881 and 1941 gave us a comprehensive demographic composition. The year 1911 recorded the highest Indian population in Arakan recorded, recording 23.5% of total population. However, in certain areas, Indian population exceeded Rakhine population. For example, the Indians in Arakan's capital, that is Sitwe, used to be called Aikya, counted 63.5% of the total population. In Mongdo, which is the neighboring area of Chittagong border, it was 77%. In Buddhist, it was 53.5%. In the colonial census, the term Indian was inclusive of various ethnic, linguistic, and religious groups with historical and contemporaneous ties to India. The de-Indianization process that we discussed above did affect the Indians in Aikya or Sitwe town, but it hardly disrupted the lives of those lived in the three areas closest to the porous Arakan-Chittagong border, namely Mongdo, Butidong, and Ratedong. So those are the three places that really got hit hard with the recent violence that we hear often in the news. So that's the area. The orange and the yellow. Yellow is the southern part of Rakhine state, and the northern is the orange. A few years leading to 1948 independence were crucial in defining the community dynamic in Arakan. First, during the Japanese occupation of Burma, that is 1943 to 45, the Japanese and the British used the Rakhine and non-Rakhine communities respectively as their proxies. Here I use the term non-Rakhine to refer to various groups known as the Rohingyas, Chittagongians, and Bengalis and Indians. Such political use of the communities was feasible due to the segregated community settlements such as Rakhine in southern Arakan and non-Rakhine groups in northern Arakan bordering. Due to the Japanese occupation, many Chittagong Muslims fled to Chittagong. After the Japanese surrendered to the Allied forces in 1945, Chittagongian Muslims returned to Arakan only to find that Rakhine had occupied their villages. The Rakhine non-Rakhine tension started from there, and it further got intensified and complicated as the central Burmese authorities from central Burma abused the tension to maintain the Burmese overrule in Arakan. From the very beginning of the Rohingya crisis, three parties or stakeholders involved in the crisis making. There were Rakhine majority on the one hand, the Muslim minority identified with various names like the Rohingyas, Chittagong, and Bengalis on the other, and the powerful Burmese in between them. It is worth remembering that both Rakhine and non-Rakhine groups considered the Burmese as occupiers since the pre-colonial Burmese occupation of Arakan in 1784. As the colonial power were negotiating the exit plans and terms, Rakhine nationalists wanted to gain full independence as a separate country. It's very important to remember, that's where the political dynamic really went crazy to some extent in post-colonial setting. They intended to prevent the looming Burmese dominance that their forefathers experienced before the British ended the Burmese imperial rule in Arakan in 1826. That means Rakhine nationalists did not want to go back to pre-colonial Burmese rule. They even planned to work with non-Rakhine groups in Arakan to fight against the Burmese. The nationalist movement in envisioning Arakan as an independent country is still well alive in Arakan. Muslims in Arakan as a whole also envisioned a distinct future. They formed the North Arakan Muslim League in July 1946 as the negotiation to split colonial India into two nations, namely Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan, were underway. The North Arakan Muslim League expressed to annex Muslim majority Northern Arakan to future Pakistan. Muhammad Ali Jinnah and his All India Muslim League did not entertain the idea as they feared that Buddhists in Chittagong might want to be annexed to Buddhist majority post-colonial Burma. So therefore, Muslim majority Northern Arakan like Mungdo, Butidong, and Ratedong fell into the Burmese post-colonial territory. However, North Arakanese Muslim inspiration to have a Muslim state like Pakistan did not fade away. In fact, it rather intensified due to UNO's Buddhist political move in early 1950s. Consequently, some Muslim factions, particularly those with live connections with then Muslim East Pakistan, formed what they call Mujahideen armed group fought with the Burmese government. They demanded to form their own independent state named Afghanistan, Pakistan versus Afghanistan. So, the Calcutta University-based scholar Swarna Bhattacharya observes that radical demand for Afghanistan divided the North Arakan Muslim into two factions, namely Chittagongians versus Rohingya in the early 1950s. The Rohingyas distanced themselves from the Chittagong-supported Mujahideens. More importantly, they wanted to be protected by the Rangoon-based central government from the other groups like Mujahideens and Rakhine nationalists, who demanded an independent statehood. In response to the Rohingya demands, the UNO government in fact identified North Arakan as a Muslim area named as the Mayu Front. Mayu is a river, and that it is the area where a lot of Muslims live, so it is kind of identified as the Muslim majority area in the late 1950s. This conciliatory gesture from the UNO government angered the Rakhine nationalists and further deteriorated the Rakhine-Rohingya relationship. Ousting UNO government, the Navy military government sided with the Rakhine nationalists and repeatedly invoked the national race criterion for Burmese citizenship. In response to the state policy, Rohingya identity emerged as an ethno-religious designation that absorbed other pre-existing identities like Indian, Bengali, and Chittagong. So by the time, of course, Burma became what we call post-colonial nation, there were many identities. But down the road, of course, all the identities were absorbed by one particular identity called Rohingya. Why did it happen? Of course, that's part of in response to what they call national race category, This discursive emergence of Rohingya identity took place because it was the only Muslim identity that has pre-colonial root in Arakan. Sided with the Rakhine nationalists, the military rule has adamantly refused to recognize the collective Rohingya identity, and they identify them as Bengalis. With that, Rohingya have been made as the stateless people in Burma with no basic rights. So how to then interpret the Rohingya crisis? Majority of people in Myanmar or Burma and the Myanmar government deny the Rohingya identity, and they insist that Rohingya are all Bengalis. The term Bengali intends to deny the ancestral roots in Arakan prior to the British colonial rule in 1824. From the perspective of Chittagong, Rohingya identity is rooted at least in the early 17th century, when Chittagong and Arakan were a united polity ruled by Arakanese kings. Due to the geographical proximity and linguistic and religious affinity with the majority people of Bengal, the Rohingya people may sound like Bengalis. That Bengali affinity, however, should not cost them their salient rights to belong to Arakan. The fundamental cause of the problem is the national race criterion in the post-colonial Myanmar citizenship discourse. There is a fundamentally flawed connection between rigid and static racial identity with the dynamic notion of nationhood. The question of who belongs to nation and who does not is exclusively predicated upon the rigid group identity named national race. Within this context, the Rohingya identity became the last resort to the citizenship for many people in northern Arakan. The national race criterion was and has been part of the de-Indianization process. It intended to disown and expel those who look different. Stripping off the citizenship and expelling the Rohingyas exemplified the last phase of the de-Indianization process that started in 1920s and 30s by the Burmese nationalists. The Rohingya issue is a political crisis caused by xenophobic citizenship policy. One cannot deny the Buddhist fundamentalists' influence in exacerbating the crisis. Even then, the religious connection to the crisis is the latest addition to the political problem that was left to plague the region for over half a century. We have discussed the danger of characterizing the political failure as a conflict between Buddhist and Muslim. It is rather a decade-long political failure that has recently drawn religion into it. So what might be the solution? I argue that the Rohingya crisis is a first and foremost an internal political problem in Myanmar. Only the Myanmar government could come up with a political solution that could resolve the crisis. To make it happen is the responsibility of international community. Let me remind some of the solutions suggested by others. As a short-term solution, Mr. Ray suggested that international community need to continue to fund the Rohingyas serving agencies like United Nations High Commission for Refugees and United Nations International Children Education Fund, Red Cross and others. He recommends that foreign aid should not be exclusively directed to the Rohingya population, but also the Bangladeshi Rohingya sheltering population in Cox's Bazar. He made the same recommendation to support Rakhine population in Arakan, who too suffered from the crisis. As Ray highlights, education should be a top priority for a long-term solution for the crisis, particularly to cultivate the eroded mutual trust between the majority Rakhine and minority Rohingya Muslims. The Buddhist-Muslim coexistence in Bangladesh and the shared history across the border could become an effective tool. For instance, a small ethnic community named Rakhine, yes, they are called Rakhine, has been living in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, Patuakhali, since the late 18th century. They arrived there as Arakanese refugees who fled the Burmese invasion of Arakan Kingdom. Their situation is not perfect, and yet they have at least enjoyed Bangladeshi citizenship and state protection. One could ask why that could not be the case with the Rohingyas. Why they cannot be the citizens of Myanmar. Their historical connections to Bengal should not be a deterrent for their rights as citizens of Myanmar. Similarly, the last month, UN fact-finding mission on Myanmar lays out what international political community can do. It categorically blames the Myanmar military for unspeakable crimes against humanity on the Rohingya men, women, children, and other people. It urges the international political community, particularly the UN Security Council, to bring the Myanmar military leadership to the International Criminal Court to stop the ongoing violence and deter such crimes happening in Arakan and elsewhere. I also think general public, civil society group, charity organizations, religious institutions and human rights advocates also could take decisive action to promote a political solution in Myanmar. As this talk on a Chittagong perspective on the Rohingya crisis, let me give an example from Chittagong itself. Post-colonial East Pakistan and Bangladesh also had majority religion and dominant ethnic discourses. The Islamic tone of Pakistan state and then Bengali ethnic hegemony of Bangladesh state have marginalized the non-Muslim and non-Bengali population of the Chittagong Hill Trust. Mostly they are Buddhist with historical ties to Arakan. This marginalization led to the ethno-political tension in the mid-1970s, resulting in a civil war between the Bangladeshi state and non-Bengali ethnic and non-Muslim groups. That conflict also displaced a few hundred thousands of people from Chittagong hill tracts. It lasted for nearly a quarter century. With the intervention of international community and civil societies, the 1997 peace accord has ended the armed conflict. That gives the hope to find a peaceful solution to the Rohingya crisis. As in the case of Chittagong, international community has to play a vital role by pressuring the Myanmar government to realize that peace. With the shared religious history across the Chittagong-Arakan border, I am highlighting a sense of urgency that has been left out in previous analysis and reports. In the Chittagong region, sympathy toward Rohingya victims, along with a sense of Muslim brotherhood sentiment, runs high. This volatile situation, in my opinion, is the biggest challenge the Rohingya crisis poses to Bangladesh government and international community. If the Rohingya refugees are not repatriated in timely fashion with a political solution, the situation could trigger another humanitarian crisis, victimizing more than another 1 million individuals on the Chittagong side of the border. Thank you.
We do have time for some questions if anybody has. Yes.
No, there's a woman here was putting her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Quick question. You said that within the next month that the Bangladesh government is going to try to resettle the Rohingya refugees to the
100.
The isolated,
100,000.
the floating island.
Yeah.
Do you have any just like knowledge about the perspectives of the host community on the island, their view?
Okay. There's no one there living in that island.
It's deserted.
No, only cattle are raised there. So there's no one really. Why? Because it is the size of the island is 15,000 acres big, but then when the water levels goes up, it becomes like 1/3 of the land goes underwater. That is so bad, you know. That's why it's called floating island.
Okay. So, but like I'm assuming that there's a lot of opposition then for them.
Opposition from the international community,
Yeah.
yes, because they think that that is kind of, you know, pushing them into the sea.
Yeah.
But the Bangladeshi government, they say we don't have enough space. As you know, Bangladesh has one of the most, you know, heavy, dense population, you know. So what they're saying is that we don't have enough space, we have a lot of problems. One of the problems, of course, as I was visiting some of these Rohingya refugee camps, a lot of securities to control them so that they cannot mix with the Chittagongians. So putting them in this island, that will solve some problem because they cannot go anywhere beyond that island. You see the point?
Yeah.
So from a governmental point of view, controlling this Rohingya is a huge task. So they are finding any way possible to do that. And they found that this is one of the solutions. And there are a lot of international communities trying to kind of persuade the Bangladesh government not to do that. But the Bangladesh government said, we don't have any other options. You guys better to solve this problem quicker so that the Bangladesh government doesn't have to bear the burden anymore. So it is very inhuman situation that's happening. So as far as I know, the Navy, the Bangladesh Navy forces, trying to build a 3-meter high wall around the island so that water does not get in. But, you know, it's an island with no strong, foundation, so it would be very impossible, I guess. So, but I think they're coming out some solution how to protect. They are determined. The Bangladesh government has determined to put these people in, and they have spent, I think their budget is, I think, 23 billion Bangladeshi takas to build this place habitable for these people. So, so I think these are very, very good signs how urgent it is to solve the problem itself.
The money that they got allocated for that, does it also account for like infrastructures like for schooling and hospital, things like that?
I don't think so. I don't
So
think
just
so.
to put them there and
Yes, yes. But then to maintain their services, the health services and educational projects and for the children, because many of them are the children there, So they are in the shoulders of the international community.
So has the UNHCR, do you know if they've set up like base on the island or?
They are observing. I think 2 weeks ago there were people brought from these agencies to kind of see what is happening, and they have expressed their concerns that it may not a very good plan, but the Bangladesh government said we don't have any other options. So of course, once these people were moved, I guess that's the plan that they said next month, and of course, and then some of these services will be available, but that will be in the hands of the international aid communities.
So what happens to the rest of the population, the refugees that are not moved?
They will remain where they are now. So the Chittagong is the kind of bordering Chittagong and Rakhine state bordering area, and that is some estimated is the biggest refugee camp in the world, and it's hosting I think over 550,000 people in the same camp. It's huge. I was there over a few hills. All the trees were cut down, and all the shelters were set up, and they are there, but it is also cramped, like crazy. So the Bangladesh government also saying that there are people who are so crowded there, and we have to move some of these people for their own safety, for their own hygiene. So that's one of the reasons. But I suspect one of the biggest concern of the Bangladesh government side is how to stop Rohingya people intermingling with the Chittagongian local Bangladeshi people. It's very easy because they are what they call Rohingya language is the Chittagongian Bengali language. They speak the same language. And one way to identify who is Rohingya, who is Chittagongian Bengali, is speaking what they call Shuddha Bangla, the literary Bangla. Literary Bangla is not spoken by Rohingya, but they're spoken what they call Chittagongian dialect. So I have observed, I have seen that whenever people, all the vehicles crossing or going into or going out of the region, there were few, more than 3 I guess, checkpoints, and they speak in the literary Bengali. They ask in literary Bengali. They are not using the Chittagongian language. And of course, as soon as they find out that no one or someone is not really capable of speaking in that literary Bengali, and they say you are not allowed to get into that part. So that's how they control the language. But then of course, how there are other ways, of course, these people can get into the wider Chittagongian society. So that is one of the main concerns. And of course, once they get into those Chittagonian society, of course, there are a lot of sympathy because of what's happening in Myanmar. That's one thing. The other thing is, of course, religious brotherhoodness, Islamic brotherhoodness. So I think that's also very much, in play in terms of the government is trying to kind of control the movement of the Rohingya people so that they cannot really get into the Chittagonian Bengali Muslim society and become Bangladeshi. Okay.
Simultaneous.
Okay, from here, and then. Yes.
Me first?
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I think it would help if you had a more democratic person in power in Burma. I knew Aung San Suu Kyi in Oxford, where I lived for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And she was the most ignorant dictator I'd ever known. I mean, one doesn't just spend too much time with such a person when Oxford is full of interesting people. And she did educate herself while she was listening to the BBC and reading stuff finally smuggled into her. And when she emerged in power, I thought she might really do something. I hoped she would. Felt sorry for her while she was in house arrest.
Mm-hmm.
But look how she runs Burma.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't pay any attention to the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Sanctions had lowered, according to the economists, had lowered all salaries of Burmese by 40%.
Mm-hmm.
When the country is in such a bad state, you can't expect them to welcome refugees. And I mean, she talks about this rule of law, which means you're Burmese or you're not. And, you know, the West saw their opportunity, of course, to have a political stooge in Burma. I'm just reading Ben Rhodes' almost closest advisor. I'm reading his autobiography. The concern of the Americans, he said he advised Obama, look, we must be active in Burma because China is next door.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody really caring about the people of Burma.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you expect them to take the Rohingyas back? And then there's all the problem with the other ethnic tribes. I mean, you know all this. Do you know Mrs. Aung San Suu Kyi?
Yes, yeah.
You know her.
So I mean, of course, international community cannot ignore what's happening, and if they kind of kind of get their attention from the Rohingya crisis, and of course, there will be another crisis. The crisis is on the side of the Bangladesh border because of the tension, of course, the religious tension, as it has been perceived as a kind of inter-religious violence, and there is a real possibility of igniting another one in Bangladesh, on the Bangladesh side. And of course, international community, I think what they can do, of course, to pressure the government in whatever way. And of course, the biggest obstacle, as we have, I think, pointed out, is China. And perhaps some extent India as well. India is not also really Yes, and it's not also trying, or it is not also giving its voice in terms of how to solve the problem itself. So you know, without these two major countries on both sides of Burma, international community, I don't know how much they can do, but at least they have to keep pressuring. And that's what I'm saying, that otherwise there is a huge problem pending, and there would be another humanitarian crisis. And I don't know what to say about, you know, Aung San Suu Kyi. You know, of course, she's claimed to be politicians, of course, but I don't think that she has the political wisdom that is needed to control this very complicated scenario, you know. But on the other hand, what are the other options available? And the other options, of course, the military government, you know. And as you know, of course, in Myanmar, some people say there's two governments. One is, of course, civil government led by Aung San Suu Kyi. The other one is the military government itself. So there is a kind of a political power struggle going on internally, and international community, of course, I mean, particularly the Western international community, is trying to help her to kind of overcome that, you know, political imbalance internal that's happening. So there is no shortcut, in fact. But international community cannot ignore and cannot turn away from crisis itself. And of course, in the world there are other crises as well. So how much attention that the international community can pay attention to? Yes?
I have visited the region, not for the last 10 years. I've not seen the camps. I've seen one of the very beautiful temples, Buddhist temples in Cox's Bazar that was burnt down. I was glad that you started the story that way and illustrated just how incredibly complex this is.
It is, yeah.
There have been Muslim sins as well as Buddhist sins in this. And I will be going to Nepal in December. And if you think about this part of Asia, from stretching not to go as far as Pakistan, but from Nepal through the tribal states to all the tensions and the problems on the border between India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, I mean, there is an extremely complex set of tribal, ethnic, linguistic, religious conflicts that have generated wars. 20,000 people were killed in Nepal in the first decade of the century in their civil war. So my short-term observation is via aid agencies, of which I'm aware in Bangladesh, there is grave concern that there will be a generation of children who will have no education. The Bangladeshi are refusing to teach them Bangla.
Yes.
Because they do not want them to have the ability to integrate into Bangladesh. And the Myanmar government is refusing to teach them their language because they don't want to get them back. So you have got this stateless group of people, and they can't even agree on what language should we use to teach children in first grades. That's one observation. There's even been discussion at the aid agencies that perhaps we have to use English. At least there is a language. But my real question to you is really coming back from your question, is that the two big powers, of course, are China and India. And the Western countries are feeling so fraught because of the failures in the Middle East. There is Trump in Washington, there's God knows what happens in Britain. And what is going on in China and India? In the case of Nepal, very much. There was a great deal of under the table, behind the scenes pressure from both the Indians and the Chinese to get some kind of solution. Are the Indians and the Chinese doing anything equivalent now, or are they just letting this awful situation
in Myanmar?
In Rohingya, the Rohingya crisis just
to my knowledge,
continue.
These are the two countries least interested.
Yes, this is my
Yes.
cruise answer
Yes.
to that question as well.
And particularly of Indian media is also doing damage in terms of kind of labeling whole Rohingya community as terrorist, Islamic fundamentalist, and it's so inhuman, and so I don't know why India is not interested in it. I assume, of course, the biggest concern perhaps is the resources in Myanmar. Whatever resources are there, everyone is trying to get hold of. And this is the time transition that's happening, so they do not want to really displease, I guess, those people who are in power, who are making those decisions in Myanmar side. So that could be one reason, the economic interest in Myanmar, and I know that India is doing everything to make sure that Indian economic interests are taken care of, particularly in Rakhine state, So, of course, as we know, I think over 70% of economy of Myanmar is in the hands of Chinese. China is not the people who are living there, but in relation to China, I mean. So, I think the biggest obstacle there is the whatever raw resources that is available in Myanmar and it is trying to find market, and India and China, of course, some Western countries as well, as trying to have their own part in the pie. So in that case, it is one of the biggest, I think, obstacle. But that part needs there are not much research on that, and because it is quite invisible, and difficult to make any research, I guess, on that. I haven't found much research on that, the economic interest of international community in the resources of the Myanmar, and how that is kind of overlooking or sidestepping the whole issue of Rohingya. Douglas?
So my question is kind of a two-part question, I guess. But I'm actually kind of interested in the role of Buddhist monastics in some of these movements. It's well known that in Myanmar itself that many prominent Buddhist monastics, Siddhu Sayadaw, the 969 movement, and so on, have been really instrumental in kind of inciting a lot of this anti-Muslim violence. And so on the one part, what I'm curious about is what sort of sense do you get among the either elite Buddhist monastic community in Chittagong today, among whether it's the Rakhine communities there or Myanmar or so forth? What's their sense on this kind of wider rhetoric? Are they simply being silent for their own instrumental reasons, or is there kind of similar sentiment? I mean, in my own kind of work in Rakhine, it seems that unfortunately, this anti-Muslim sentiment is quite rampant among the monastic community. And I'm especially interested in that because of all these connections between Chittagong and Rakhine, this kind of wider Theravada movement. But it seems to me that everyone I spoke from Rakhine is completely disconnected to communities in Chittagong today, as if that nation-state line has truly divided them. So if you can kind of speak to both of those.
Yeah. So first thing, of course, this religious connection to this whole Rohingya crisis, I should say, it started, I think, in the early 2000 or so. Before that, we hardly find, of course, there were incidents here and there, but it was not as a movement. And it started, I think, 2001 or so. And it is part and parcel of, I guess, the global anti-terrorism. In that case, the terrorist means the Islam. And in the discourses, what we find is they have used repeatedly what happened to Burmese Buddhist statue. The Taliban destroyed it, and that has been used by Buddhist monastics to make this case that all Muslims are bad and Rohingyas are in our country, and of course they are part of it. So they are after us, this existential crisis going on. But that is BS, of course. But they have made that discourse to promote their agenda. As you notice, of course, there is a huge anti-Rohingya sentiments in the monastics leadership in Rakhine state. And that has spread not just in Rakhine, but in also other parts of Myanmar. And so that's why it's not just Rohingya recently, also non-Rohingya ethnic Muslims also subjected to this kind of attack. On the other sides of the board, of course, Chakma and Myanmar, they still have not really felt that much the exodus of the Rohingya. But the Bengali Buddhists have felt tremendously because of the 2012. So they are doing everything to make it, kind of the tensions to go down, So for example, of course, they have reduced some of these, robe offering ceremony, festivals, and then collected donations and then given to some of these people in Rohingya camps. And that's going on regularly. And there was some, blood donation going on in terms of within the Buddhist communities, so that, if the blood is, required in the Rohingya community, so they offer it. So they are doing everything to make it happen. And they have also, interestingly, interreligious dialogues started within Buddhist community with the head of the Buddhist monks and some of the fundamentally kind of in tune Muslim groups. So they are saying that this is fundamentally not a religious issue. What we see is a very much this nationalism, the sense of not even Rakhine people. In fact, it is the Burmese have this dominant Burman influence on the Rakhine state, and they are making and exacerbating this whole process. So, but I don't know how long will it. But still, particularly the Buddhist monastic leadership in the Chittagong plains, they are trying everything to make it kind of under control. Otherwise, they would be the subject of the whole terror. So it is very volatile, I should say, very volatile. And some argue, in fact, even some Rohingya communities are getting into the hill tracks area and trying to find locations and for their own residence. So it is quite a volatile scenario there. So at least from the Bangladesh side, of course, they are trying to make it more controlled. But the longer they stay there in Chittagong, I mean the Rohingya, the bigger problem is there. Yes?
It seems to me that when Nehru came into power and the military government usurped their power over everybody there, that's when the problem started. Because previous to that, UNO was the president and he was democratic and everything was peaceful and quiet. People lived there in peace and harmony. The Muslims were there and the Buddhists and the Hindus, everybody else, Christians. No problems at that time. It's only when this Nehru came into power and he came up with something called Burmese way to socialism, which is like communism. And he made life miserable for everybody, so they all left.
That's true.
Christians left at the time we did, and we thought that was fine.
So you were there?
Yeah, I lived there.
Okay.
It was very, very hard to live under this regime.
Yeah.
About 2 years we lived under that, and we said, we can't take this anymore. He wouldn't let people go. Held on to them, no passports. We had to struggle, and after a long time, we managed to get away.
Yeah.
But it was a very difficult time. Previous to that, everything was fine. So I think if they can get rid of this military government, when they should have done it at the very inset, then they wouldn't have had all these problems.
I think you're exactly right. I think that's what my hunch is also. I think, of course, we can blame on San Suu Kyi and for all these things, but I think what are the other options available? So as I said, there is internal power going on, and I sometimes feel like it's a trap. The whole Rohingya, particularly the last, I should say last 10, maybe 9 or 7 years or so, the whole intensifications of the Rohingya, the violence against Rohingya people, is a trap by the military government. So if you think about the ministries of the Myanmar government, Suu Kyi is responsible for external affairs. The internal affairs is in the hands of the military. They are taking care of internal affairs and then defense, and there's another one. So if you think about, so this is Rohingya crisis is completely, they say it's an internal issue. So in the hands of the Myanmar military's hand. The external is what? International community is blaming Suu Kyi for these all things because she is responsible for, kind of in connection to maintaining diplomatic relations with the other states. So in that case, I find that, they're making it happen so that she looks so bad in the eyes of the international community.
She's only a de facto leader there. She doesn't have the power that the military government has.
That's
why I suggest, I don't know how they're going to do it, but get rid of the military government, and then things will be
They cannot, they cannot, that's the thing. So the transition is happening, but it's taking so slow. And the military government or the people who are in power, particularly the military side, they are trying to do everything to slow down the transition or maintain their power. 20% of the parliament is in their hands. They don't have to, stand for elections. They get those seats.
And also, for 7 years, she nearly got shot. So I think she's afraid her life will go if she does anything more now. She's just denying that there's any problem, but the United Nations report says there was almost genocide and people are suffering and struggling and
Yeah.
being killed. There's definitely a problem there. She's denying it.
I think she is denying to the domestic audience. That's very strategic as well, But I don't think that she's denying consciously that But it is more or less, I think, politically strategic. I guess. I'm not sure. I cannot read her mind. But yes.
Thank you for your remarks, first of all. I'm not an expert in this part of the world. However, I have recently seen a number of images of the Burmese border.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like a very serious border. That the Burmese government is very serious about no one crossing it. So we come to something we really haven't talked about in terms of refugees and refugees camps. And so I'm going to predict, without a lot of knowledge, but with a lot of general knowledge of things, that we have a group of people who are not in Burma, who aren't going to go back unless they want to get shot. And they're going to end up in a refugee camp because they can't go forward, they can't go backwards. And so that's our future the next 50 years plus.
Rohingya people, they said we don't want to go. Unless we are given what they call equal rights, like any other Burmese citizens. So until that political solution is available, there's no point of pushing them into the border. Border is, some argue that it is filled with mines now. You just step in and you will lose your life. So Rohingya people know that very well. So they may not even try to get into their own villages. And there's no point, in fact, because the armies are there with their guns, ready to shoot, So what's the point of trying to even cross the border? I don't think that anyone is people trying to get out of Myanmar, but not trying to get in.
Okay. So the question is, once you get out, where do you go?
Now they're in Bangladesh. Yes, they are in Bangladesh. The Bangladesh government is kind of helpless, what to do. Bangladesh government was so rigid at the beginning. And they turn away a lot of people, in fact, like boats after boats. Those boats sometimes ended up, in the seas and killing a lot of people. But then international community pressure Bangladesh, you guys have to keep border open, and then suddenly the whole border was completely open and a lot of people came in. So now, of course, Bangladesh is saying that we cannot keep these people anymore, and we don't have the resources. Of course, resources may come from the international community, but there are other things, other problems that the Bangladesh community, Bangladesh state has to deal with. So these are not based on the resources. It is more social problems, like the inter-religious tension that may pop up. Then who will be responsible for taking care of the Bangladeshi nationals who are Buddhist or non-Buddhist? So that's the whole issue.
So we have 2 more questions and then we'll wrap it up. We're at 7:30, so 2 brief questions. Yeah, and I saw you on first and then gentleman in the back.
Well, my friends who put Aung San Suu Kyi into power, she was now after them. She wants to be president. The most important thing to her in her life is to be president. She is prime minister, foreign minister, and 4 ministries she has, right? What is she going to do that, she wants something from the army. What is she going to do that the army doesn't like?
Let's call her.
Pardon me?
Let's make a telephone call and ask her. It's quite a complicated, of course. I don't know, what's happening inside of the Burma in terms of political dynamic. But her hands are also tied to some
Yes,
extent,
yes.
So
yes,
that part
that's
I think some people don't understand, and we are blaming her. But at the end of the day, what are the options she has? Some people say, I have heard some international, even Nobel laureate said, she should resign, she cannot do that. If she cannot take care of the country, of course she should resign. But is that the solution? I don't think so. I mean, if she resigns, and then of course someone will pop up and make things worse perhaps, Even the glimpse of hope that we have in the democratic governance, eventually I guess it will move on in the right direction. But if that momentum is broken, I think we will end up in the worst scenario. Yes?
Just thank you for your presentation, and at the end, so just very briefly, is there anything that we can learn from the experience of the Bihari refugees who remained in Bangladesh after the 1971 war when East Pakistan became Bangladesh? There was a civil war, and many East Pakistanis who self-identify as Bihari refugees were unable to return to what was West Pakistan and what Pakistan proper. Is there anything we can glean, or is there a clue for the long-term prospect of Rohingyas who are now in Bangladesh?
I think one of the insights that we can draw from the Bihari case, in Bangladesh, is the longer these people in Bangladesh, the more difficult it may become. Because one thing, of course, as this gentleman mentioned, they may not have any knowledge to go back and integrate with Burmese society. That's one thing. The other thing is, the longer they live in Bangladesh side of the border, they may eventually get rooted into the country and society and wider social network. They may not have even incentive to go back to Myanmar. So that is the insight perhaps we can learn from the Biharis. Although there is a trend, there is a push, or even some people say they want to go back, but they are almost kind of now Bengalis, So in that case, of course, Bangladesh is becoming the ground, lack of better term, dumping ground, I guess, for all these kind of humanitarian crises happening around. So I think that's what one of the things I think the more urgency is to get these people out of Bangladesh and get into the Myanmar side of the border, so that they have a sense of connection to the land and build their life in Myanmar itself.
Okay. Well, on that note, we'll thank Dr. Pruitt for a great talk, very detailed talk.
Thank you.
Yeah.